A young boy named Alec was busy fishing by the lake one day when a strange man suddenly approached him and asked if he'd like to learn some magic. The offer sounded way too good to pass up, so from then on, Alec would spend the entire day training with Eldest to become a mage. One particular day, Eldest was giving Alec a lesson on how to use fire magic in case he ever needed to protect others, and it was a little more complicated than what Alec was used to, but he eventually got the hang of it. He was a little disappointed that it took him a whole day to master fire magic, but Eldest reminds him that most people have to study for an entire month to accomplish what he just did in a single day, so he should be proud of himself. Alec still wants to learn more, so he asks Eldest to continue teaching him. But he says they've done enough for today, so instead he suggests that they should just do some fishing until it's time for Alec to go home. Alec ends up agreeing to take a break, but he's not happy about it because he wants to learn magic as quickly as possible. Eldest chuckles and tells Alec that he has incredible talent for magics, so even if Eldest hadn't started training him, he's sure Alec would have become an exceptional mage on his own. If that's the case, then Alec asks why Eldest even bothered teaching him in the first place, and Eldest has his reasons, but before he could explain anything, a fish took the bait and started pulling on his line, so both he and Alec immediately dropped the conversation and tried to pull it up with all their might. The next day, Alec's training continues, and this time, Eldest has brought a magic book for him to read, but to Alec, it's more confusing than the time they started adding letters to math, so it takes a while for him to understand. Over the next few months, Eldest takes his time explaining all the magical formulas to him, and little by little he comes to understand them. However, by spring the next year, when it was time for their usual training session, Eldest came bearing some bad news. He said he has to leave the capital soon, so he won't be able to train Alec anymore, but before he leaves, he wants to give his student a friendly warning. With his talent, Alec could easily become a court magician if he wanted to, but Eldest told him that if anyone ever offered him the job, he should turn it down immediately because it's not worth the trouble. He then turns to walk away, but before he leaves, Alec has one final question for him. So he asks why Eldest chose to teach him magic in the first place, and Eldest explains that he did it because Alec's mother did him a huge favor while she was still alive, so he wanted to repay that kindness by looking after her son. Several years later, Alec is now a student at the Royal Academy, and he has just found one of the school's old yearbooks, so he flips through it and finds the section about Eldest. Just as expected, Eldest was the top graduating student at the time, and he became a court magician shortly after, but for some reason he ended up getting banished from the kingdom, which is probably why he was forced to leave Alec back then. In that moment, Alec decides that the best thing he can do is become a court magician to change the opinion of the imperial court so he can repay Eldest's kindness, completely forgetting that that's exactly what Eldest told him not to do, and fast forward a little, we see Alec getting banished just like Eldest was. Alec had joined the hero party consisting of the crown prince, Regulus, a mage named Leni, and a knight named Ix, but while they were in the middle of a mission, Regulus tells him he's fired. Alec doesn't understand why Regulus would suddenly want to get rid of him like this, so he explains that as the crown prince, his job is to be on the front lines with his sword, Leni is meant to push enemies back with her magic, and X blocks enemy attacks for the party. But all Alec ever does is stay in the back and cast support spells like defense or enhancement. Alec tries to argue that there's an important reason he does that, but Regulus cuts him off and says someone who can only use support magic is too pathetic to be a member of the hero party. Keep in mind that Alec never even wanted to join this stupid party in the first place, but after he became a court magician, the prince ordered him to join, and he couldn't refuse a royal command. Leni and Eggs join in and start calling Alec useless, but the prince is the one who's really useless here. He literally made a rule that commoners like Alec aren't allowed to carry weapons, just because he doesn't want anyone else to steal his spotlight. Alec tries explaining to him that he thinks it's important for all party members to be armed and prepared in case of emergencies, but the prince hasn't had an intelligent thought for years at this point, so he will not tolerate a free thinker like Alec. He tells him that he isn't needed anymore, so he should just go home, and Alec is left questioning his life choices because he did not sign up to be insulted by an ungrateful man-child. Up to this point, Alec had put in an insane amount of effort to compensate for Regulus's stupidity, because he would have died a long time ago otherwise, but even after he was fired, he still wanted to help as much as possible. So he wrote out some monster attack patterns and strategies for Regulus to use next time he goes into the dungeon. However, while he was on his way to deliver the letter at the castle, he was suddenly stopped at the gates by the guards. They informed him that he had been stripped of his title as a court mage, so he no longer has permission to enter the castle. Just then, Leni shows up and she's just here to rub Alec's unfortunate situation in his face because she has always hated him. He was praised to no end when he graduated from the Magic Academy and set a new dungeon record, so she's been jealous of him since day one. After she's done mocking him, she turns around to leave, but Alec begs her to at least deliver this letter to the king for him. It was King Furcus who ordered him to join Regulus' party, so for Regulus' sake, it's important that the king reads this letter. However, Lainey couldn't care less about Alc's stupid letter, so she rips it to shreds right in front of him and orders the guards to kick him out. It has been 4 years since Alc graduated and became a court magician, and he tried his absolute best to fix the problems with the imperial court, but in the end, he couldn't change anything. Just then, Alc hears a familiar voice call out his name, so he turns around and finds Yorha, an old friend of his, standing there. She runs over for a hug once she realizes it really is him, and afterwards, they sit down by the canal to talk. Alc explains everything that happened to him since the last time he saw Yorha, and she yells that she can't stand the kingdom of Galdina because the nobles are always so focused on discriminating against the commoners. Alc agrees with her, but he tells her to quiet down because it'd be troublesome if someone were to overhear her rant. She tells him it's fine since no one else is around right now, and regarding Alc's current situation, she feels bad for everything he had to go through, but she's actually glad that he got kicked out of the prince's party, because that means there's nothing stopping him from joining a new party now. And on that note, Yorha asks Alc if he'd be willing to come clear dungeons with her party. Alc asks her if she's really okay with recruiting someone like him, but she knows better than anyone that Alc is a beast when it comes to magic, so there's no one else as qualified as he is. Hearing someone finally acknowledge his strength brings a tear to Alc's eye, so he gets up and tells Yorha that he'd love to join her party. The next morning, the two begin their journey to the city of Faisal, and Alc has flashbacks to what Eldest told him about avoiding the imperial court, and how things would have been so much easier for him if he had just listened to his advice, but it's not like he can change the way things played out now. Meanwhile, back in the capital, Regulus has just been informed that Alc left the capital and calls him a sorry excuse for a mage. He'd only ever forced Alc to join his party because everyone called him a magical prodigy, but he hated having a commoner on the team, so he's glad he got rid of him. Lainey adds that now they can get a replacement who is of pure noble blood, and without an incompetent fool like Alc slowing them down, Regulus will become famous for clearing a dungeon faster than anyone else. A few days later, Alc and Yorha arrive in the city of Faisal, and she begins telling him all about how wonderful this place is because it doesn't discriminate against commoners, and it's the perfect base for an adventuring party. Speaking of which, that reminds Yorha that they still need to get Alc registered as an adventurer, so she leads him to the guild so he can get started. Unfortunately, when they get inside, the receptionist tells Alc that he doesn't qualify. You need a special license to go past level 30 in a dungeon, and you need to be registered with the guild for at least 2 years to qualify for that license, so Alc won't be able to get it for a while. Yorha asks if they can make an exception for him, but the receptionist says she can't change the rules. Yorha can't believe this is happening, even though she sent her friend Keisha to come ask for special permission before they got here. But it turns out that Keisha was incredibly rude to the receptionist, so they won't be getting any favors from her anytime soon. Yorha is really disappointed since her party has already reached the 52nd floor of the dungeon, and they won't be able to make any new progress with Alc until he gets his license in 2 years. She realizes that there's no point in complaining about it now, so she says they should just focus on the places Alc is allowed to go in the meantime. He doesn't need the pass to go into areas above level 30, so there's still plenty of exploring for them to do as a group, and she wants him to enjoy his time here. Later that day, Alc and Yorha head into one of the dungeons and are currently facing a swarm of red hornets. Yorha casts enhancement magic on him so he can take down a few of the hornets, but that barely leaves a dent in their numbers. She doesn't understand why things got so difficult so quickly, since level 2 was never this hard to clear before, but Alc thinks something must have happened to the hornet nest, which is why all of them are in a frenzied state right now. Yorha puts up a defensive shield and charges into the swarm, but Alc warns her to stay back because it'd be much safer to maintain their position and take the hornets out one by one. Yorha yells that he needs to remember what he was like before he became a court magician. Back then, a swarm of hornets like this would have been no match for him, and he now realizes he doesn't have to hold back to avoid bruising the prince's ego anymore, so he is free to use as much magic as he needs. He stops restraining himself and uses attack magic to burn up a few of the hornets, and once he regroups with Yorha, he uses a wide area thunderbolt spell to fry the remaining bugs. However, just when it seemed like the battle was over, a giant earthworm emerges from the ground and grabs Yorha. This thing must have been the reason the hornets were acting so crazy earlier, and it's definitely going to eat Yorha if he doesn't do something soon, so he needs to act quickly. He has a plan in mind, but just to make sure it will work, he asks her if her defense magic is still as strong as it was back when they were in the academy, and in response she asks him if his attack magic is still as strong as she remembers it to be. They both trust each other's capabilities, so Alc begins casting his fire tornado spell, completely engulfing the worm in a torrent of flames. Yorha was caught up in the flames as well, but Alc knows her shields are more than enough to protect her from flames of this intensity, so there's no need for him to worry. Once Yorha is back on the ground, she tells Alec that his magic is still just as amazing as before and she can't wait to meet up with the rest of the team so they can have fun just like old times. Before graduation, Alec was part of a legendary team of students consisting of Ornis the Genius Warrior, Krasia the Genius Archer, Yorha the Genius Support Mage, and Alec the Genius Attack Mage. On the day of graduation, they had just broken the all-time dungeon record by clearing the 68th floor, and as a result, they earned themselves top ranks at the academy. But as they were walking home and discussing their plans for the future, Alec suddenly stopped in his tracks and told his friends that he actually planned to become a court magician. His friends are disappointed to hear that, especially Ornis, since if Alec had joined them, they could have created the strongest adventuring party in existence, but he respects Alec's decision because he knows he must have a good reason. But before they went their separate ways, Yorha made it clear to Alec that she isn't giving up on recruiting him, so the second he becomes available, she will be there to extend an offer. That brings us back to the present, where Yorha is officially welcoming Alec to the party, and to celebrate, she treats him to a hearty dinner. However, she doesn't do so well with alcohol, so after one mug of beer, she becomes belligerent and can barely stay standing. It doesn't take long before she collapses on her seat and falls asleep, so Alec uses magic to cover her with his jacket so she won't catch a cold. Just then, a man suddenly appears behind him and says Alec is awfully considerate for an adventurer. Alec thinks it's just a random drunkard, so he decides to ignore the man and turns away, but this gets on the man's nerves, so he swings his bottle at Alec. The glass shatters on impact, but Alec had used a magic shield to protect himself, and he is about to retaliate, but all of a sudden, the man calls him by his name and tells him he lives up to the rumors. He then slides a dungeon pass onto the table for Alec and tells him he can think of it as an apology for testing him in such a crude manner. Alec was angry before, but now he's just confused because he has no idea who this man is, but all of a sudden, Yorha gets up from a drunken daze and asks Alec what the guildmaster is doing here. Alec is shocked to find out that this man is really the guildmaster, and the guildmaster says he'd like to see what the former court magician can do in person, so he asks Alec to come down to the training center with him. A little while later, they all arrive at the assessment room and the guildmaster officially introduces himself as Leviel Stands. Alec recalls hearing stories of how Leviel used to be part of an S-rank party, so he knows fighting him won't be an easy task, but he is still excited because he thinks this is the perfect chance to polish his skills before actually heading into a dungeon. As soon as the match begins, Alec launches a thunderbolt at Leviel, but he rolls out of the way and launches a water slash at Alec in retaliation. Alec realizes that he won't be able to rely on long-range spells here, so he decides to get in close and beat Leviel in hand-to-hand combat. However, as he was approaching, Leviel had cast enhancement magic on his body, giving himself an insane speed and power boost. He is now so fast that Alec can barely keep track of his movements, and when Leviel finally decides to strike, even though Alec was able to block the strike with a shield, he is still sent flying into one of the walls. Yorha is starting to get worried, but Alec soon gets up and says he's fine. He was caught off guard by the speed of Liviel's attack earlier, so he starts thinking of ways he can dodge it next time. But then he starts laughing because he realizes he can actually do a lot more than dodge. Under the prince's command, Alec was forbidden from being proactive in combat, but as an adventurer, he isn't limited to evasion and support magic anymore. He coats his wand in magic to create a sword and charges forward, so Leviel launches another water splash at him. But Alec is easily able to slash through it as he advances. Leviel is impressed, but he doesn't think Alec will be able to do the same to his punches, so he enhances himself against and charges at him again. However, Alec had already prepared a countermeasure for Leviel's dash attack, so as soon as he gets within range, he is hit with the full force of Alec's Thunderbolt spell, leaving him wide open for Alec to strike. Leviel is amazed that Alec actually managed to land a hit on him, and he can see why Yorha praises him so often, but this test is far from over. Leviel activates his ancient artifact, forming large gauntlets around his arms, and a single punch from these babies is enough to leave a massive crater in the ground. Alec realizes getting hit by one of those would be devastating, so he needs to be really careful, but he doesn't intend to give up, so he tries hitting him with another Thunderbolt, but this time, it barely does anything to slow him down. Leviel's artifact's special ability allows him to heal his injuries over time, so the longer this battle drags out, the worse Alec's odds of victory will become. He needs to keep Leviel from healing, so he begins striking at him repeatedly, but none of his attacks are landing. Alec mocks Leviel for dodging all his attacks and asks him if he's scared to face him head-on, and that gets under Leviel's skin, so he takes a wild swing at Alec, leaving himself wide open for a slash to the stomach just as Alec had hoped. He has finally done some more damage to Leviel, but it's going to take a lot more than that to keep him down. Leviel charges at Alec again, and Alec tries to defend himself with his shield, but it shatters on impact from the sheer force of the punch. However, it does break Leviel's momentum, so Alec uses the opportunity to strike him in the chest. Leviel refuses to let himself loose to Alec, so he tries to hammer fist him, creating a massive dust cloud. Yora thinks Liviel is going a little too far for something that's meant to be a test. The hit like that shouldn't have been enough to knock Alec out, but he still manages to sneak up behind Liviel and launch one final strike, and that was the last of the strength he could muster, so his wand snaps and he falls unconscious. Yora rushes to Alc's side to check on him, and Liviel admits he might have taken things a bit too far this time, declaring Alec the true victor of the match. While Yora attends to Alc's injuries, Ornis shows up, having grown tired waiting for him, only to be shocked to discover that Alec had been dueling with Liviel. He tells Liviel that it was pretty lame of him to use his ultimate weapon in a friendly sparring match, but Liviel says he just got a little carried away. He is now sure without a doubt that Alec is qualified to enter the dungeon, so he can have the dungeon pass and whatever else he needs as long as he promises not to sue over this. Even though it didn't go as expected, Ornis congratulates Alec on passing this unfair test, but he's still out cold, so they take him back inside and set him down on a couch to rest. By now, they've all heard the story of the injustice Alec had to endure as a court mage, and it's honestly amazing that he managed to last there so long. The castle is full of elitist idiots who can't stand the sight of commoners, so Alec must have had to work incredibly hard to maintain his position. Just then, the receptionist barges in looking for the guildmaster and tells him that there's bad news, so Liviel tells the others he has some business to handle and leaves them in his office to look after Alec. But he demands that they absolutely do not touch his alcohol collection. As soon as Liviel is gone, Ornis immediately heads over to his alcohol collection and grabs the most expensive-looking bottle just to piss Liviel off later. He then asks Yorhan to fill him in on the exact details of Alec's time as a court mage, since he has only heard vague stories up till now. And oh boy, there's a lot to talk about. Alec was tasked with protecting the prince, but he was also forbidden from carrying a sword or using any magic that would make him look stronger than the prince. On top of that, he was also forced to carry their luggage and manage the party's items. And worst of all, after forcing Alec to use nothing but support magic, the prince called him useless for using only support magic. Ornis is a little confused by that last part because he thought Alec's specialty was attack magic, so Yorn explains that Alec went out of his way to learn support magic to appease the prince, even though he wasn't suited for it. After learning of everything that the prince put Alec through, Ornis is enraged beyond belief, and as soon as Alec wakes up, he suggests they should put the dungeon raid on hold and head over to the kingdom to beat up that damn prince who made Alec suffer so much. Alec tells Ornis to calm down because while he is upset about the way he was treated, he isn't angry enough to go maim the prince. However, Ornis is more than willing to do it on Alec's behalf if he wants. Alec puts his arm on Ornis' shoulder and tells him that he really doesn't have to worry about it, because as long as he gets to go on adventures with his friends, he doesn't care about anything else. Besides, he's sure karma's going to hit the prince hard now that no one's there to clean up his messes anymore. Hearing that gives Ornis a great idea, so he tells Alec they just need to become the world's greatest adventurers, and eventually, once news reaches the castle, the prince will definitely regret kicking Alec out. And when he starts begging for Alec to come back, he will have the opportunity to look him right in the eyes and reject him with as many insults as he feels like. Alec admits that he likes the sound of that, so he fist bumps Ornis, promising that they'll become the strongest party together. Meanwhile, in the other room, a member of an S-rank party is being bandaged up while she gives the guild master a breakdown of everything that happened on her mission. It was a complete failure, and the rest of her teammates are still stuck in the dungeon, so Krista asks Liviel to assemble a rescue team for them. Liviel calls an all-hands-on-deck meeting, but considering the short notice, the only people available right now are the ones who were already at the guild. He tells everyone that they will be forming a team to rescue the members of Krista's party, who are currently stuck on level 64 of the dungeon. All the adventurers exchange worried looks because they all know how dangerous that floor is, but while the meeting is going on, Alec is still sitting in the guild master's office by himself. Once Kreja arrives, she finds Alec all alone and asks him how he's been doing, but judging by all the injuries he currently has, he obviously isn't doing great. She asks him what he's doing here when they have a meeting to attend, but Alec says he didn't want to intrude since everyone at the meeting is an A-rank adventurer, and he still thinks of himself as an outsider compared to them. Kreja raises her hand and uses restoration magic to heal Alec, and after that, she tells him that he should know no one here would call him an outsider. While Alec was a court magician, he had subconsciously developed the trait of never standing out or speaking up because he risked offending the pretentious nobles. And even though he knows things are different here, it's not easy to break 4 years' worth of habits overnight. Kreja can tell that Alec is having a rough time, so she pats him on the head and says she's always here if he needs help, and that makes him feel a lot better. A few moments later, Ornis and Yora return, and Ornis tells Alec that they just got the perfect excuse to head into the dungeon. He explains the details to Alec and tells him that the place they'll be heading is called the Tank Killer. It was given that nickname because while inside, all forms of healing magic are completely useless, so you can only rely on potions for recovery. Alec is surprised that Krasia is okay with this mission since healing magic is one of her specialties, but she actually does hate the idea of going there. She just got forced into accepting it because Ornis kept insisting that it'd be a good starter mission for the team. Alec is a little worried that he may not be strong enough to be of any help, but Yora tells him he is the backbone of the operation. Their entire operation will be relying on Alec's magic, so they literally wouldn't be able to do it without him. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.
Take you out.